Ancient stone ruins in Bolivia, ghost cities in China, a whale skeleton in the Sahara Desert, a sunken forest off the coast of Great Britain, a recent snowstorm in Morocco, a billionaire's survival bunker in New Zealand. Something specific connects all of these phenomena, and today you will find out what. Welcome to Science of the Pole Shift. My name is Kent Crandall, and I am involved in a community of scientists, astronomers, and independent researchers whose focus is the Nibiru system and the upcoming pole shift. I would like you to forget anything you have heard about Nibiru up until now, as it was most likely disinformation. Today we start with a clean slate. I will be presenting data that will challenge your worldview. I encourage your skepticism, but I also encourage you to think critically and question your existing assumptions. Ask yourself, why do I believe what I believe? My goal is to enlighten and entertain. Let's get started. Section 1. Meet Nibiru. This is an ancient Sumerian tablet that depicts Nibiru, shown as a globe with wings, in between the moon on the left and the little sun on the right. The word Nibiru is an ancient Sumerian word meaning crossing or point of transition. To understand Nibiru, we must first understand how our sun is part of a binary system, meaning there is another star attached gravitationally to our sun. Scientists have known about this for decades, but our sun's binary twin cannot be seen with the naked eye or even an optical telescope. Let's look at some news article clippings, something I do a lot in this presentation. First, astronomers clue in to why binary stars are so bountiful, from September 2014. Why are most stars in the universe in pairs, from February 2016, and more recently, new evidence that all stars are born in pairs as part of a binary system, from the UC Berkeley News, June 2017. Stars having twins is common throughout the galaxy, so why is our sun's binary twin so difficult to see? Because it is unlit. It is a dead star. And astronomers came to this conclusion decades ago, since they can prove the existence of the sun's unlit binary by how its gravity affects our space probes and the outer planets in our solar system. It was in vogue in the scientific community of the 1980s to speculate how big and how far away the sun's unlit binary actually was. In a Newsweek article from 1982, they speculate on the existence of the sun's unlit binary, asking, does the sun have a dark companion? Yes, the sun has an unseen companion, a dark star, at least the size of Uranus. In Astronomy magazine, also in 1982, they talk about how the Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 space probes were used to calculate the location of the sun's unlit binary, and how, now that they knew where to look, a satellite would be launched called the IRAS probe that would perhaps take pictures of it. There is an unknown body whose gravity tugs at the two outer planets. The object itself could be a planet, and the IRAS probe should detect it. Then in January of 1983, NASA and JPL launched the IRAS probe, the Infrared Astronomical Satellite, from a Delta 166 booster rocket. And later in December of that year, they spotted not the sun's unlit binary, but the Nibiru system hurtling towards our sun from the direction of the sun's unlit binary. This was big news back in 1983, making the front page of the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Los Angeles Times. We have discovered a heavenly body, possibly as large as Jupiter. It is part of this solar system. It is a giant planet, a stone's throw away. I don't know how the world's scientists would even begin to classify it. So what the IRAS probe found is a planet that was orbiting both stars in our binary system, both the sun and the sun's unlit binary. This planet was going around both of them. And since the IRAS probe of 1983 astronomers have discovered many more instances of planets which orbit both stars in a binary system, as this article from Astronomy Magazine in 2014 states. Half of all exoplanet host stars are binaries, and in some cases the planet orbits both stars. So this is a pretty normal thing to find out in our galaxy. So what does it all look like? Our sun's unlit binary sits out in the direction of the constellation of Orion, specifically towards Orion's belt. So every time you look at Orion's belt, you are looking in the direction of our sun's twin. Its gravitational pull creates the elliptical orbits of the outer planets, Neptune and Uranus. See how they are pulled towards the sun's unlit binary, and this is not to scale. This is for illustration purposes. There is a planet that orbits both the sun and the sun's unlit binary. I am going to call this planet Nibiru, which is the same name the Sumerians gave it, and they named it the last time it passed by Earth around 1600 BC. And here is what we think we know about Nibiru. And when I say we, I'm referring to the community of astronomers, scientists, and independent researchers who study this phenomenon and publish their findings online. Nibiru passes through our inner solar system once every 3,600 years, roughly. Once Nibiru flies into our solar system, it comes up under the sun towards the orbital plane of all the planets and slows down to a crawl due to the crowded environment of our inner solar system. You see, our inner solar system, where the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars reside, is like a tightly packed Swiss watch with interacting particle flows, gravitational fields, magnetic fields, all moving and changing and affecting each other. When Nibiru encounters this environment, it slows to a crawl on its trajectory and gradually makes its way up towards the orbit of Earth, bobbing and weaving in its path, much like a salmon swimming upstream. Nibiru dithers, staggers, backtracks, and lurches as it takes 20 years to creep up past the Sun and then past planet Earth. When Nibiru does finally break through the orbital plane, it grabs the Earth in a magnetic grip, pulling it out of its orbit, only for the Earth to snap free as Nibiru escapes and continues on its 3,600-year journey back towards the Sun's unlit binary. Earth, in the meantime, experiences a sudden shift of its crust over its core, resulting in a different tilt on its axis, with the equator and north and south poles suddenly in new locations. This crustal shift is called a pole shift, because the north and south poles invariably end up in new locations. This slide illustrates the 20-year-long wandering path that Nibiru takes once it enters into our inner solar system. Please understand that these images are wildly not to scale. If the sun were this size, as you are seeing here, the Earth would be back along the edge of a parking lot 2 blocks away. Okay. Also, the movements of Nibiru are exaggerated for effect. So now you can see how Nibiru bobs and weaves and changes its position as it slowly approaches the orbital plane of the Earth over approximately 20 years. When Nibiru makes its final flyby of planet Earth, it grabs Earth in a magnetic grip, spins it around, then lets it go, creating this pole shift that we will cover in more detail later. Why does Nibiru grab the Earth and spin it around when it passes by? Because they are both highly magnetic planets. Magnetic means that the entire planet is a magnet with a magnetic north pole and a magnetic south pole and a magnetic field. This is why a compass works on Earth. The compass's little magnetic needle lines up with the Earth's magnetic field and points towards magnetic north. Now don't get confused because we are talking about different poles now. The magnetic north pole of Earth is not the same as the geographic north pole. or in the same location. The magnetic North Pole wanders over time, and right now the magnetic North Pole is drifting towards Siberia from northern Canada. Many birds and mammals use the Earth's magnetic field for navigation. Are there other magnetic planets in our solar system? Mercury is magnetic, while Venus is not. Earth is, while Mars is not. Neptune and Uranus are magnetic. And what about the Sun? The Sun is the biggest magnet of all. Its magnetic field affecting everything in our solar system and beyond. The planet Nibiru is actually part of its own mini-system. Nibiru has a handful of moons following it, as well as a huge tail of boulders, rocks, gravel, red dust, and oil. Here is an artistic rendition of the Nibiru system, showing the shroud of red iron oxide dust that envelops it, along with several small moons that swirl around it as it travels, caught up in its gravitational pull. Again, this is not to scale, as in reality, this tail of dust and debris sweeps out for millions of miles in space. If Nibiru is your elbow and Nibiru's tail is your forearm, then the tail acts like if you're waving your hand around out in space. I'm supposed to show myself on the video for this, but I couldn't figure out how to make that work. So it gets blown around by the solar wind, put it that way. Nibiru's tail does. Here is another artist's rendition of the Nibiru system, this time looking head-on with a tail flowing out to the sides. Something else that needs explaining is how the tail of any comet or planet that passes through our solar system behaves. The sun is constantly shooting off particles of energy, electrons, protons, photons, gravitons, magnetons. This flow is called the solar wind. The solar wind causes the tail of a comet to always point away from the sun, as you can see in this image here, and if the comet passes between Earth and the sun, the tail may lash the Earth, and that's what Nibiru does. Researchers tracked the Nibiru system throughout the 1980s and 1990s as it approached our solar system. Nibiru finally entered our inner solar system in March of 2003. Since that time, it has been caught up in the particle flows near the sun as it slowly approaches the orbital plane of Earth. You can't look up at the sky right now and see the Nibiru system directly, as it is too close to the sun and resides within the sun's glare. If you filter out the sun's glare with eclipse glasses, you also filter out the weak reflections of light off of the Nibiru system, and you can't see it that way either. Special chemical filters are required that pass light in the red spectrum, and observers with the correct filters can take pictures of Nibiru and track its location daily. The pole shift community has been tracking it since 2003. Eventually, Nibiru will leave the sun's glare and become daylight visible to everyone on Earth. Until that time, which is a few years away, or maybe sooner, there are other optical phenomena which give away its presence, and I will touch on these later. So that is the first part of the presentation. I promise it will get more interesting. I have mentioned the shift of the Earth's crust over its core, which accompanies every passage of the Nibiru system, once every 3,600 years or so. Let's break it down further and look at some details. Once the Nibiru system enters our inner solar system, it immediately begins to affect not just planet Earth, but the other planets as well. For example, since 2003, scientists have noticed climate change on both Jupiter and Mars, as well as Earth. For 20 years, these symptoms get stronger and stronger as Nibiru gets closer and closer until, in the final weeks before the pole shift, Nibiru starts to break free of the particle flows of the inner solar system and speed up for its flyby of planet Earth. When it does fly by planet Earth, never colliding, it spins the Earth's crust over its axis, causing what we are calling the pole shift. And as the Nibiru system flies away back on its regular orbit towards the sun's unlit binary, the Earth returns to its normal orbit. But some things will be changed in the aftermath. Once the Nibiru system enters our inner solar system, as it did in 2003, it begins its slow 20-year climb up to Earth's orbital plane. Remember that this is a lot of ground to cover, 93 million miles. The first effect this has is that Nibiru's magnetic field interacts with the molten iron core of planet Earth, churning it and creating friction with the crust. This friction, in turn, warms the oceans from the bottoms up, which in turn warms the air, creating global warming. So yes, global warming is real. No, it's not caused by driving an SUV. The second effect is that Nibiru's magnetic field pushes on the Earth's magnetic north pole once every rotation, causing the Earth to wobble on its axis. This Earth wobble starts out small, as it did in 2004, and gets progressively greater and greater, causing an irregular jet stream, which wreaks havoc with the weather. Has anybody noticed odd weather these last few years? All this churning and wobbling work together to loosen the tectonic plates, which bump and grind more and more as Nibiru approaches. This leads to increased earthquakes, increased volcanic eruptions, electromagnetic pulses, which bring down airplanes, methane release, and unexplained trumpet sounds or howls in the atmosphere. Finally, as we showed on the comet slide, Nibiru's tail is getting blown away from the sun and towards the Earth, and on occasion the tail will lash the Earth. When this happens, red dust and oil settles into our atmosphere, causing red-stained air and water, and the oil causes rainbow clouds, and also causes sundogs and other sightings. Called second sun sightings. A second sun sighting is when sunlight gets focused down the tail of Nibiru like a long twisted flashlight, which then shines onto certain parts of the Earth, making a second sun appear in the sky. I will show examples of this later. Okay, this is a busy slide, but we have to underscore all these dynamics. In the final weeks before Nibiru passes by the Earth and causes our physical poles to shift places, several notable things occur. First, the Nibiru system leaves the sun's glare and becomes visible to the naked eye during the daytime. We see this depicted in ancient tablets from the time of the last pole shift. The Nibiru system will start out looking like a fuzzy red ball, which gets bigger every day, much like these captures of the Nibiru system taken by the webcam at the Neumayer research station in Antarctica. What else? The tail of Nibiru will lash the Earth more frequently as it approaches, causing red dust in the air, a reddish hue to the water, and more fires and meteors. Also in the final weeks, the Earth wobble will become very extreme, leading to high coastal flooding, more earthquakes, and more volcanoes. Finally, right before Nibiru does its final flyby and the pole shift occurs, Nibiru grabs Earth in its magnetic grip. The Earth's rotation slows, stops, then even reverses, but only temporarily. This will lead to unusually long days on one side of the Earth and unusually long nights on the other. Have you ever heard the term 3 days of darkness mentioned in certain religious texts? This is why. By the way, gravity is not affected by the rotation stoppage, as gravity depends on the mass of the planet and not its movement. And then finally, the pole shift occurs. All within the space of a couple of hours. A massive earthquake is felt world over as the crust of the Earth slips over its core. Then hurricane force winds accompany the earthquake. All active volcanoes erupt at this point, and the oceans slosh hundreds of feet over their shores, and this sloshing lasts for days, back and forth in each ocean basin. Aftermath. As the Nibiru system releases its magnetic grip on planet Earth and continues away along its 3,600-year trajectory back towards the sun's unlit binary, the Earth's orbit slowly returns to normal, except it is rotating now on a different axis with a different equator, and the north and south poles will be in different locations. Sea levels will rise as the old ice caps melt. Climate experts estimate 100 to 200 feet of sea level rise from melted ice caps alone, while pole shift researchers estimate an additional 400 feet of sea level rise from the heating of the ocean due to the friction caused by the Earth's crust slipping over the core and swelling of the Earth as well from the heat. So, a lot of sea level rise. As you learn in high school physics, when water is heated, its volume increases. When this happens on a global scale during the pole shift, sea levels should rise way beyond 200 feet. So we expect a total sea level rise of approximately 600 feet in the days and years after the pole shift. Over time, new ice caps form and the oceans cool back down, lowering sea levels back to where they were before. And remember how I mentioned all the volcanoes erupting? All that ash in the sky will last for several years. It will look something like the 2009 movie The Road with Viggo Mortensen. That movie actually portrays a pole shift scenario where society has collapsed and the weather is constantly ashy and drizzly with rain as people migrate around trying to survive and figure out what happened. Finally, survivors of the pole shift will find that much of the land on planet Earth has been reconfigured. The tectonic plates have moved big time, and we can tell from past pole shifts what direction they tend to go. The Atlantic Ocean gets pulled apart and down. India gets shoved under the Himalayas, pushing Mount Everest up and sinking India below the waves. The west coast of the United States gets pushed up. The east coast of the United States gets pulled down. This happens every pole shift. The Andes get pushed up. Western Australia tilts underwater, while Eastern Australia lifts up higher. New Zealand does very well, rising above the waves on a stable portion of the tectonic plate. Flooding is expected to turn Europe into mostly islands. Eastern Russia survives very well, while Japan gets shaken into oblivion. So that is the aftermath of this coming pole shift. And that's the end of this section, so here's a quick recap. Nibiru is a small planetary system, one big planet and a bunch of small moons and debris that orbits both our sun and our sun's unlit binary twin. The Nibiru system swoops through our solar system every 3,600 years, roughly. Over its 20-year approach past the sun, Nibiru causes climate change, earthquakes, and then a shift of the Earth's axis. After the pole shift, the north and south poles of planet Earth generally end up in different locations, and the climate is different throughout the planet. Okay, enough doom and gloom. Now for my favorite part, the history, the historical stuff. And we start with recent pole shifts. If Nibiru flies by Earth every 3,600 years or so and spins our planet around, let's see where the north and south poles used to be based on evidence of glaciation. Let's start just shy of 15,000 years ago. At this time, the North Pole sat over Europe and Scandinavia. The Nibiru system came through for its regular passage and pole shift. At about 12,600 BC, the North Pole moved from Europe to Siberia. About 3,600 years went by. Here comes the Nibiru system again. And pole shift. Just under 11,000 years ago, with the North Pole moving to the Bering Sea and Alaska. This pole shift made quite an impression on the planet, as it resulted in the Great Flood of legend. Sea levels rose permanently at this time, sinking many coastal cities. Most of the great giant mammals of North America died out, and climate change turned the Sahara from a desert into a savanna. Then 3,600 years went by, and here comes the Nibiru system again, and whoosh, pole shift. The new North Pole is over North America. This pole shift saw the Sahara turn from savanna back into a desert and saw the inundation of the Black Sea, which was mostly dry before that. Look into it. 3,600 years go by again, and here comes the Nibiru system again for its most recent passage and pole shift. This latest pole shift, which was 3,600 years ago, saw the biblical Exodus, as well as the late Bronze Age collapse, also the Chinese Xia dynasty collapse, Mohenjo-Daro abandoned, and of course, new climates worldwide. Every pole shift changes the climate in every location on Earth, sometimes changing it a little, sometimes changing it a lot. This brings us to the present day with the polar ice caps sitting over the Arctic Sea in the north and the Antarctica in the south. Next section, ancient evidence. What sort of evidence can we find supporting the science of the pole shift? Let's look at whales and woolly mammoths, rapid climate change, and abandoned cities. Have any of you heard of the Charlotte whale? The Vermont state fossil, it is a whale skeleton found in a field in 1849, 200 miles from the ocean at an elevation of 340 feet. The bones were carbon dated to 10,500 years ago. And what happened at that time, 10,500 years ago? There was a pole shift and great flooding. The floodwaters washed the whale 200 miles inland and left him there. Whales are mammals and have heavy bones like humans. Since whale bones are so large, they weren't dragged away by scavengers and coyotes and other animals. On a side note, every culture on the planet has its own flood myth, from the Chinese to the Indians to the Hawaiians and Incas. 3 pole shifts ago saw a change to the face of the planet that was so huge it left an impression on human culture for millennia. Are whale bones found in other weird places around the world? Yes, they are. In Ontario, Canada, whale bones were found, again dated to 11,000 years ago, and far from any ocean. Whale skeletons have been found in the Egyptian desert and on high dry land in Chile. Whales weren't the only ones affected by the pole shift 10,500 years ago. That was 3 pole shifts ago. Did you know that North America once had as many wild animals as Africa does today? Camels, lions, tigers, elephants, and zebras roamed from the valleys of California to the plains of the Midwest. Then, about 11,000 years ago, they mostly died out. Researchers used to blame the Indians for hunting them to extinction, but recent studies have shown that sudden climate change was to blame, as their lush jungles and savannas turned to tundra. So, 3 pole shifts ago, the North Pole moved from Siberia to over Alaska, all within the space of a couple hours. Much of North America went from an equatorial climate to a much drier, harsher environment. Let's look a little closer at the phenomena of woolly mammoth graveyards. Woolly mammoth graveyards are a smoking gun for the science of the pole shift. Large herds of dead woolly mammoths are found all over the globe, from Serbia to South Dakota to Siberia. In Siberia, they pull intact corpses out of the permafrost, with skin and hair still intact, some still with blood in their veins. These mammoths show signs of drowning, with mud packed in their throats and food still in their stomachs. The only way to preserve bodies this well is through flash freezing, the equivalent of throwing the body into a deep freezer. But how could this occur naturally? A woolly mammoth is just a long-haired elephant, same size, same lifestyle, and although we find woolly mammoth graveyards in places that today are barren tundra, the National Elephant Center tells us that elephants prefer savanna and rainforest to live in, where they can find the 200 to 600 pounds of food a day that is consumed by one adult elephant. Elephants are vegetarians and eat tree branches, bark, twigs, bushes, and grass, and they drink 50 gallons of water a day. In the popular conception, because we find dead mammoths in tundra today, we assume that they lived on the tundra, as these modern illustrations show. But a mammoth is just a hairy elephant, and elephants need jungles and savanna to survive. Where is the food for a herd of elephants on this tundra up here? Do you see any trees, any branches, any bushes taller than your knee? How can a tundra support herds of hundreds of elephants? Woolly mammoths would starve to death quickly on a tundra. Woolly mammoths lived in savannas and forests, just as modern elephants do. During past pole shifts, a hapless herd of mammoths would suddenly find its habitat whipped up into the polar region, first flooding, then flash freezing them all in place. Because the average temperature at the North Pole is minus 40 degrees. After thousands of years, another pole shift would move that mammoth graveyard back south to a warmer climate where they could be discovered by mankind. Let's leave our woolly mammoth friends for a moment and look more closely at the Earth itself. Not only does the planet get reoriented during the hour of the pole shift, but the tectonic plates shift up and down as well. Some plates rise, some plates sink. One thing researchers have noticed is that the shores of the Atlantic get dragged down with every pole shift. We find proof of this last fact in Doggerland, a large swath of Europe that used to sit above the waves but sank down with each pole shift. Scientists were first tipped off to the existence of Doggerland when Dutch fishermen would pull mammoth bones up in their fishing nets, along with handmade fish hooks and axe heads. These were signs of human habitation. But on the floor of the North Sea, which is just north of the Netherlands, out in the ocean, you can see on this map the lighter green land used to be above water. Then around 11,000 years ago, it sank, leaving the medium green land, which in turn sank a few thousand years later until you have the pink land left today. So with each pole shift, every 3,600 years, the tectonic plate that Europe sits on gets pulled out and down towards the Atlantic Ocean. This is a regular occurrence. We find evidence of Doggerland in the ancient Welsh forests, located underwater just off the shore of western England. You see how the land gets pulled underwater with each pole shift. These trees have been carbon dated to the time prior to the last pole shift 4,000 years ago. Where else can we find signs of human habitation that sank beneath the waves during a past pole shift? Off one of Japan's southern islands lies the Yonaguni Monument, remains of an ancient city that were discovered by a Japanese scuba diver in 1987. The massive structure contains hallways, stairs, doorways, and carvings of a whale. Researchers estimate the age at over 9,000 years old. So when Yonaguni was built, it had to be on dry land, but since then, pole shifts either raised the sea level or sank the tectonic plate, or possibly a bit of both, and now Yonaguni sits underwater. We find these sunken cities all over the planet. In 2002, off the coast of India, an oceanographic expedition found the remains of a vast city 120 feet underwater. Huge stone foundations, pottery, human bone were found, carbon dated to over 9,500 years ago. We know that the Indian subcontinent sinks significantly during every pole shift. Down in the Baltic Sea, divers discovered an 11,000-year-old human settlement 52 feet underwater off the coast of Sweden, finding a harpoon, hand tools, and cattle bones. And in the Black Sea, marine archaeologists found stone tools and the wooden beams of houses 300 feet down and 12 miles off the coast, showing that there was dry land at that spot 7,500 years ago. This is all pole shift related. Let's check in with our pole shift timeline and see where these all fit. 10,750 years ago, the pole shift caused the sea levels to rise. 7,500 years ago, 7,300 years ago, the Black Sea flooded. So, if this pole shift science is accurate, that means any place on Earth could have been one of the poles at some point. And Antarctica, for example, might have been up on the equator and been a jungle at one time in the past, right? So does that mean we could find, say, palm trees under the ice of Antarctica? Yes, we can, and they have. Antarctica wasn't always at the South Pole. And if the science of the pole shift is accurate, climate change happened very rapidly in the past. The Sahara Desert was once lush and populated. Climate change about 10,500 years ago turned the desert into a savanna. There it is in a scientific article. And then, very rapidly, about 8,000 years ago, something strange happened. The area turned from a savanna back into a desert. So researchers here are confirming that at about the time of two pole shifts ago, the climate changed completely in the Sahara. Checking in with our pole shift timeline, we see that 3 pole shifts ago, the Sahara Desert turned from a desert into a savanna, and then about 7,300 years ago, the new weather patterns caused the Sahara to turn back into a desert, which we still have to this day. When the Earth gets new poles and a new equator, it also gets a different jet stream with different monsoon and hurricane seasons in different places. One last note about woolly mammoths to bring us to the most recent pole shift that happened 3,600 years ago. Today, Wrangel Island is an isolated scrap of tundra in the Arctic Ocean, but researchers have found woolly mammoth remains from just 3,600 years ago on this island, and they think that these were the last woolly mammoths to have ever lived. Scientists today scratch their heads wondering why mammoths survived on this island for over 6,000 years, then suddenly died off all at once, right around 3,600 years ago. Quote, "We wanted to find out why they became extinct. We rejected the inbreeding theory. They were isolated for 6,000 years but maintained a stable population. What possibly could have driven them to extinction right around 3,600 years ago?" asks the scientist of today, totally clueless about pole shift science. Well, that was the time of the most recent pole shift, where Wrangel Island was whipped from a temperate zone full of trees and grass up into the Arctic Circle, where it resides today, covered in tundra. So of course all the mammoths on the island died out at that time. Their environment shriveled up and froze. Their food all died. Elephants cannot survive on tundra. See how Wrangel Island moved from a temperate zone full of grass and trees to the Arctic Circle. And here is what Wrangel Island looks like today. Barren tundra. Since we are now talking about the most recent pole shift 3,600 years ago, what other evidence can we find? 3,600 years ago was roughly 1600 BC. 1600 BC was the end of the Bronze Age, where mankind started using iron and steel for his weapons and tools, and evidence shows that the Bronze Age ended in a massive collapse of every major civilization in the Mediterranean. In fact, historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse. The Mycenaean kingdom, the Hittite empire, the Egyptian dynasties all collapsed with trade routes disrupted, cities destroyed, and literacy extinguished. Every major city at that time, from Troy to Gaza, shows a destruction layer in the archaeology. With populations reduced, people turned to hunter-gatherer lifestyles, and record-keeping halted for over 100 years. Eventually, certain cultures recovered, such as the Egyptians and Assyrians, and they carried on into the Iron Age. As one researcher notes, "My main thesis is that there must have been a perfect storm of calamitous events in order to cause the Late Bronze Age collapse. There was climate change, there was drought, famine, earthquakes, invasions, rebellions, all at the same time. As we now know, when Nibiru enters the solar system, you first have 20 years of increasingly strange weather and earthquakes, which leads to crop shortages and collapsed structures. Then, when the pole shift happens, massive flooding and sudden drastic climate change lead to total societal breakdown. Not knowing if all these changes happen just in their little area, people tend to migrate out looking for greener pastures and places to live, and cities that were once heavily populated become deserted. Do we find evidence of deserted cities in other cultures besides the Mediterranean? Yes, we do. Near India, we find huge advanced cities at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in the Indus Valley that existed for 1,000 years and then were suddenly abandoned right around 1600 BC. And we learned from a study published in 2012 that natural climate change wiped the Harappan civilization off the map. The Harappan people fled their cities in response to a climate change cycle of declining monsoon rains that stopped feeding rivers. So basically, when the last pole shift happened, the lush, fertile river valley turned into the desert that it still is today. People had to leave Mohenjo-Daro. So did any civilization leave written records of the strangeness that accompanied the last pole shift? Yes, several did. The Jia dynasty, one of China's earliest kingdoms, collapsed suddenly right around, you guessed it, 1600 BC. The Chinese are known for their good record keeping, and records from this time come to us from the Bamboo Annals, describing odd weather and the earth wobble, followed by massive flooding of the Yellow River. Quote, in the 29th year the sun was dimmed and distressed. Ice formed in the summer mornings and frosts in the 6th month, July. Heavy rainfall toppled temples and buildings. Heaven gave severe orders. The sun and moon were untimely. Hot and cold weather arrived in disorder. The 5 cereal crops withered and died. So they are describing the blending of the seasons that accompanies an extreme earth wobble right before the passage of Nibiru. Shortly after this, the kingdom collapsed as starvation and climate change led to migration and breaking down of the political order. Checking in with our pole shift timeline, we see how the North Pole moved from over North America to over the Arctic Sea about 3,600 years ago. This would have changed the jet stream, the westerly winds, the monsoon and hurricane patterns, drying up some rivers and creating new ones elsewhere. Pole shifts and the climate change that come with them have led to the abandonment of cities found all over the world. Ancient cities, such as Tikal in Guatemala, Mesa Verde in Colorado, La Ciudad Perdida in Colombia, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Skara Brae in Scotland, Pumapunku in Bolivia, and many others. Next section, modern evidence. Shown here is a second sun sighting, which is sunlight refracted through the tail of Nibiru aimed at the Earth, captured by Great Britain's Sun newspaper in October 2017. And 2017 is also when I first put this whole presentation together. And I will show the full video at the end of this section. When the Nibiru system entered our inner solar system in March 2003, Nibiru slowed to a crawl next to the Sun on its approach to the orbital plane of planet Earth. Shortly afterwards, the Earth wobble began, very small at first, increasing every year since. Also in 2003, the first images of the Nibiru system began appearing on the internet. And let's look at a few of these images. Google Sky uses NASA satellite images from the 1980s and 1990s, and one of them caught Nibiru incoming decades ago. Strangely, that section of Google Sky was blacked out until June 2015, but is now online for anyone to see. When Nibiru entered our inner solar system in 2003, an astronomer in North Carolina captured it in this photo. Look closely and you can see the moons in the tail. The Nibiru system pops up on NASA's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Satellite, or SOHO satellite, from time to time. Here is a clear capture from 2009. Note the tail. Researchers are regularly monitoring the location of Nibiru with the use of chemical filters. The chemical filter makes the images hazy, but allows us to see how Nibiru shifts position relative to the Earth, and how the tail of debris is being blown towards the Earth. Webcams around the world have caught Nibiru hundreds of times when the atmospheric conditions are just right. Here is a small sampling: Alaska 2016, Netherlands 2017, Italy 2018. And if you're thinking, hey, how come Nibiru isn't in the glare of the sun? These are optic phenomena where the light like it's bent around, or we see a monster persona. There are many signs that Nibiru is in our solar system right now. Thousands of pages worth of evidence and signs. I could show how the Earth's magnetosphere has collapsed from the particle flows of Nibiru, or I could show the tilt to the face of the moon, or how the sun doesn't always rise and set in the same place, or the right place, or at the right time. And that's due to the Earth wobble. But to prove these takes math, and more time than we have here today. So instead, let's focus on the most dramatic and noticeable signs that Nibiru is in the solar system. Number one, the churning of the Earth's core creates warming of the oceans from the bottom up, leading to global warming. Number two, the Earth starts to wobble more on its axis as Nibiru approaches, creating a crazy jet stream and wild weather. Number three, the churning of the Earth's core plus the wobble make the tectonic plates bump and grind, leading to increasing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions all over the world. Number four, the stretching and compressing tectonic plates create fractures in the soil, cracks, and sinkholes. Number five, this same plate movement, tectonic plate movement, releases methane gas from the soil, which can kill off animals in the vicinity. Number six, red iron oxide dust, along with oily elements in the tail of the Nibiru system, settle into the Earth's atmosphere, creating optical phenomena like rainbow clouds. It turns snow and water orange and red. And finally, number seven, sunlight gets focused down through the tail of Nibiru like a crooked flashlight or a fiber optic cable, and when the conditions are right, it projects a beam of light onto our planet, resulting in a second sun sighting, which looks like another smaller orb of light right next to the sun. When Nibiru entered our solar system in 2003, its magnetic field started churning the molten iron core of the Earth, creating friction with the crust, which heats the oceans from the bottom up, leading to global warming. In a peer-reviewed study published in the Nature Science journal in 2004, researchers show how the deepest waters of the North Pacific Ocean warmed significantly across the entire width of the ocean basin. In an article published to Live Science in 2013 by an oceanographer from the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they express surprise how deeply they find the ocean's waters heating, not just at the surface. Surprise because the prevailing mindset was that the ocean was heating from the air down, which is absurd if you know anything about thermodynamics. They find substantial increases in ocean temperature at the very bottom of the ocean's abyssal plains. And in 2015, three ocean scientists at NASA's JPL laboratories published a study stating that the deepest parts of the ocean have been heating up the most. And you can see from this chart where red is heat, and this is the deeper down you go, that right around 2003, 2004, the bottom of the ocean started heating up drastically. Here are a few more articles confirming the warming of the oceans from the bottom up. From June 2013, the Antarctica's ice shelves are melting from the bottom up, not from the top down. From July 2013, warming in the deep ocean may be unprecedented. New study confirms the oceans are warming rapidly, from June 2017. I explained how once a day, when the Earth's magnetic North Pole swings around to face Nibiru, it gets pushed away by Nibiru's magnetic North Pole, creating a wobble in the Earth's rotation. This Earth wobble started in 2004 and has been noticed by scientists and can be seen by regular people in how the sun doesn't always rise or set in the correct location or at the correct time. If you do the math, you can verify this for yourself tonight. Also, it has been noticed that the moon appears slightly off its axis at times. Mainstream science has tried to explain the Earth wobble in a variety of ways. Here are some of the more amusing ones. Earthquakes are causing the Earth to wobble, we are told by National Geographic in 2011. Scientists just figured out what's causing the Earth to wobble. It's droughts. Droughts are the cause. Oh no, wait, it's melting ice sheets. Melting ice sheets are causing the Earth to wobble. Or maybe it's fossil fuels. Burning fossil fuel is causing the Earth to wobble. Hell, I don't know, just blame it on global warming like we do for everything else. So mainstream science is offering a lot of excuses for why the Earth is wobbling so much on its axis, but they will never admit the real reason. It's Nibiru. They don't want to cause a panic among the common folk. Global warming and the Earth wobble combine to create craziness in the jet stream. This leads to record-breaking weather, as we have been seeing for over a decade. Every year, more weather records are broken than the previous year. In 2017, we had record snowfall in the Sierras and more Category 4 hurricanes than ever recorded. From March 2015 in the Washington Post, global warming messing with the jet stream and your weather. From June of 2016, scientists declare global climate emergency after jet stream crosses the equator. The jet stream is not supposed to cross the equator. It never used to do that. From February 2018, North Pole surges above freezing in the dead of winter, stunning scientists. They are not stunned. They know why this is happening, but they're not allowed to say. The temperature at the North Pole is supposed to be minus 40 degrees in winter. But notice how the Earth wobble has displaced the coldest weather to over Siberia and the UK, while the North Pole got a sudden rush of warmer air. That's the wobble weather for you. And who remembers the Siberian Express from 2015? Arctic air as far south as Florida, breaking records and wreaking havoc over the East Coast. These are all results of the crazy jet stream caused by the Earth wobble along with the warming oceans. And in the 3 years since I made this presentation, I could fill a dozen slides of examples of record-breaking weather. But you guys get the point. Increasing earthquakes. Here is a chart from the United States Geological Survey showing the surge in Oklahoma earthquakes. Oklahoma sits on the New Madrid fault line, and since 2003, Oklahoma has gone from being one of the least seismically active regions in the world to the most seismically active region in the world. Mainstream science likes to blame fracking, but fracking alone doesn't explain the deep crustal shifting being experienced all over the Midwest right now. As you can see from this second chart by the USGS, it's not just Oklahoma. The entire US is seeing an increase in earthquakes. You see how the number starts to rise right after the 2003-2004 time frame. Cracks and sinkholes. As the tectonic plates shift, they create cracks in the land and sinkholes all over the world. They cause burst water mains and sewer lines. They pull fiber optic cables apart on the bottoms of the ocean, and they make bridges sag and fall. Animal die-offs. When the tectonic plates rumple, stretch, and shift, they can release methane trapped beneath the surface. If the methane is released from the floor of the ocean or a lake, it will rise in a bubble to the surface, killing sea life in its path. Methane released from land can get blown into a valley, killing livestock there, or rise up into the sky, killing birds in its path. Whales and other mammals use the Earth's magnetic field for navigation, and at times the Earth's magnetic field gets scrambled by the magnetic field of Nibiru, causing whales to beach themselves. So these animal die-offs are not just happening, they are happening more and more. Increased animal die-offs are one of the principal warning signs that Nibiru is in our solar system. Rainbow clouds. Rainbow clouds often get mention in the news when they appear, as they make a big impression on eyewitnesses who spot them. Scientists explain them away with a theory about the sun needing to be at a 58-degree angle and hexagonal ice crystals all being in alignment in a cirrus cloud. But from these pictures, you can see that many different types of clouds can show these rainbows, and at all times of the day. That's because they are caused by the oily elements in the tail of Nibiru, wafting through the atmosphere, much like an oily puddle in a parking lot shows rainbows across its surface. A few more instances from the mainstream news. June 2011, did you see San Diego's magical rainbow clouds? February 2017, incredible fire rainbow cloud phenomenon creates stunning sky display over Singapore. April 2017, rare sighting of incredible unicorn rainbow clouds spotted slicing across the sky over Pagadian City in the Philippines. And from June 2018, you don't need rain for these rainbows, spotted over Ottawa, Canada. Remember that the tail of Nibiru is filled with red iron oxide dust. This is what gives the Nibiru system its red appearance in the sky. When the tail lashes the Earth from time to time, these oily and dusty elements settle into the atmosphere and sometimes fall to the ground. A recent occurrence from March 26, 2018 illustrates this nicely. Freak weather, orange snowstorm submerges tourist resorts with eerie apocalyptic scenes. A snowstorm in Sochi, Russia dumped oily red dust all over the mountains. Mainstream media was quick to blame dust from the Sahara as the culprit. But, according to Russia's environmental watchdog agency, the snow was reported to be malodorous, oily, and contained 4 times the normal level of iron. Does dust from the Sahara Desert have oily iron oxide in it? No. This was a textbook example of red dust falling to Earth from the tail of Nibiru, and we can expect this type of thing to happen more often as the pole shift approaches. Around the time of the last pole shift in 1600 BC, you can find stone carvings of second suns and winged suns showing the phenomenon of the tail of Nibiru focusing sunlight like a crooked flashlight or a fiber optic cable down to planet Earth. Second sun sightings like these have been on the increase since 2003, captured on film and video around the world. And here are pictures of Wales, Indonesia, and Florida. You see the second sun up in the sky. Sometimes you see the clouds in front of it. That's how you know that it's not just a lens flare or an optical defect in the lens of the camera. From England, 2016. This is the Middle East, 2017. Brazil, 2016. This looks almost like a monster persona, but you see the reflection on the water. And from over London in October of 2017. A very interesting example happened in October 16, 2017, a month after I put this presentation together. A textbook tail lashing occurred over the UK, complete with red dust in the air and on the ground, red dust in the sky, red sun at midday, and a second sun sighting. This makes sense, since when the tail of Nibiru is lashing the Earth, it focuses the sun's light along its length like a fiber optic cable, shining a beam of light onto the Earth from the direction of Nibiru. This sighting happened at midday, and Hurricane Ophelia was nearby, which helped pull the dust down into the lower atmosphere. The media was quick to put out a cover story, blaming dust from the Sahara Desert and calling the second sun sighting a, quote, trick of the light. Is sand from the Sahara Desert red, like Mars? No, it's not. It is sand-colored, not red. But the powers that be do not want people to panic about Nibiru. Here is some of the video taken that day. You can see the second sun appear. This is sunlight being refracted and reflected through the tail of Nibiru, and it looks like a smaller second sun, usually pretty reddish in color. You can see the clouds pass in front of it as it fades in and out, so you know it's not just a lens flare or a defect in the camera. So, who knows about the pole shift, and how are they preparing? Do any of you have friends or family who suddenly felt the need to plant a garden or started keeping chickens in the last few years, or who suddenly decided to move inland, somewhere mountainous or wooded? Even if people are not aware of the Nibiru system specifically, the Earth is showing us through all these signs that a pole shift is coming, and I believe it registers with people on a subconscious level, leading them to start prepping. Often, pop culture is a reflection of what we as a society are worrying about most. In recent years, we have been inundated with media depicting survival after the collapse of modern civilization. Are we being warned? Or is this another expression of our collective subconscious, showing angst over the future? Even though we, the common people, are kept in the dark about Nibiru, there is clear evidence that those in power know all about it. After Nibiru arrived in our solar system in 2003, the United Nations and several non-profit groups got together to fund the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, a cold storage depository of seeds for millions of varieties of crops located on an Arctic island near Norway. The first stone was laid in June of 2006, and the seed vault opened for business in February of 2008. The Doomsday Vault, the seeds that could save a post-apocalyptic world. The vault is positioned 430 feet above sea level to avoid flooding when sea levels rise. The Chinese government kicked its Ghost Cities program into high gear in 2005, building several massive empty cities in its interior. These cities aren't just tract home developments like you'd find in the United States. They are complete, self-contained cities with infrastructure, sewage, freeways, schools, hospitals, government buildings, and parks. Here are the 6 largest of the Chinese ghost cities. They were built inland, away from the coasts, on higher plateaus of land, on stable portions of the tectonic plate. The goal is to have a place to move the elites and government workers prior to the upcoming pole shift. Right now, China's largest cities are all on the coast, where flooding will wipe them out. Cities like Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Shanghai, and Suzhou. Even the capital city of Beijing is only 143 feet above sea level. Melting ice caps alone will flood Beijing. To preserve their power base and their culture, the Chinese government is planning ahead. Here is a map of the largest ghost cities, and here is a flood map showing a 200 feet sea level rise. Now, here is a 600-foot sea level rise. You can see which ghost cities are safe from flooding. How is Russia preparing? Vladimir Putin knows all about Nibiru and the coming pole shift. Russia is a vast country with enormous natural resources. However, most Russians live in the West, which is low-lying land. Let's look at a 600-foot flood map of Russia. Uh-oh! Moscow, St. Petersburg, Volgograd are all going underwater after this next pole shift. But look at Russia's far east. It does quite well, being at a higher elevation and full of fertile land. So Russia has been taking steps to relocate its government to the Far East and to settle more people out there in order to preserve their power base and culture. Medvedev instructed to send offices of major state companies to the Far East, a Russian news site from 2014 tells us. Russia looks to populate its Far East. Wimps need not apply, says the New York Times in 2016. And from the Moscow Times in February of 2017, Russian government starts free land giveaway in country's Far East. So like Russia, or like China, the Russian government is actually working to preserve its power base and culture, this time by pushing people and bureaucratic infrastructure to the Far East. The Egyptian culture survived the last pole shift, and their current government is determined to survive this one as well. The capital city, Cairo, is being relocated to the hills several miles east of its current location. Now I wonder why they chose this particular spot. Let's look at our 600-foot flood map. Looks like a safe location for the future capital. From March 2015, Egypt unveils plans to build a new capital east of Cairo. From October 2016, Egypt is getting a new capital with help from Chinese investment. And from September 2017, China to invest $11.2 billion in Egypt's new capital. New Zealand should do well during the coming pole shift. It has a population that is small, well-educated, and English-speaking. It has fertile land full of farms and sits on a tectonic plate that rises up above the waves during each pole shift. Images from the huge 9.0 earthquake of 2016 show how new land was pushed above water. So, who cares about New Zealand anyway? Apocalypse Island. Tech billionaires are building bolt holes in New Zealand because they now fear social collapse or nuclear war. So what do they know that we don't? Asks the Daily Mail in February of 2017. The billionaires know about the coming pole shift. They know about Nibiru. They know through their contacts in government and other elites. And now you know what the billionaires know. You're welcome. The super rich are preparing for the end of the world, buying houses in New Zealand. Billionaire Peter Thiel just secured property and citizenship there, says CNBC News. Super rich preppers buying up in New Zealand in case of U.S. collapse. William, Kate, and Prince George arrive in New Zealand for 10-day royal tour, sent by the Queen, no doubt, to renew contacts with the local elites and to inspect progress on the construction of the royal bunkers. Disclaimer, that's just my conjecture. A lot has happened since then. This article was from 2017, I think. Not just New Zealand, but Colorado, Kansas, Indiana, Switzerland, Germany, and South Africa are seeing an explosion of construction on luxury bunkers. The man who builds luxury bomb shelters for paranoid one-percenters. This 15-story underground doomsday shelter was built from an old Atlas missile silo in the Midwest. How is the United States government preparing? The U.S. government has been building out enormous underground infrastructure, known as deep underground military bases, or DUMBs, for many years, mostly in the higher stable regions of the country. This map pinpoints the biggest underground bases. Notice how little development there is on the East Coast, which is expected to be underwater. Here is our 600-foot flood map. A facility underneath the Denver airport has been designated the new Western White House for continuity of government. Doomsday Secret. Is there a secret bunker hidden beneath a U.S. airport built to save government chiefs from the apocalypse? You bet there is. The end game. So where does all this leave us now? Countdown to the pole shift. Now we talk about the future here, which means that it's my opinion. But I made this slide in 2017, so let's see how I did with my predictions. If our 20-year timeline is accurate, we should see the pole shift occur somewhere around 2023. So what can we expect until then? Extreme weather, big earthquakes along the New Madrid fault line, crop failures from the weather, economic, political, and social upheaval. We see political upheaval already in the Ukraine, Venezuela, Turkey, the Philippines, Catalonia, Saudi Arabia. At home in the U.S., there seems to be a new reason for social unrest every few weeks, doesn't there? Now, I wrote that back in 2017 and sure applies today in the middle of 2020 when I'm recording this. From 2019 to 2021, expect more of the same but worse. Constant earthquakes, blending of the seasons, more collapse, more upheaval. There might be a month here or there where things seem calm, but the craziness will start up again shortly thereafter. After the New Madrid fault adjusts the way the tectonic plates work, the stage is set for a big shift of the San Andreas fault out in California. So look for a big California earthquake after the big New Madrid earthquakes happen. And somewhere between 2022 and 2024, Nibiru should become visible during the day to the naked eye, and the elites will go into hiding. And if you call up NASA for answers, the phone's just going to ring. No one's going to answer. And then, pole shift! Epilogue. After seeing this presentation, you might want to learn more or fact check what you have heard. Please understand that the powers that be do not want the common people, that's you and I, to panic over Nibiru. The elites of this world, they want everyone to keep working their jobs, paying their taxes, paying their mortgages, and investing in Wall Street. So if you go out and Google Nibiru or Google pole shift, you will get page after page after page after page of articles full of ridicule, denial, debunking, false information, misleading data. Just look at this one from Telegraph newspaper. Nibiru, how the nonsense Planet X Armageddon and NASA fake news theories spread globally. See, that's how they do it. They ridicule and dismiss in their headlines because they want people to feel embarrassed to be doing the research or to start believing any of this stuff. And if you're not aware of this already, our mainstream media can put forth well-coordinated, campaigns of lies to convince everybody of the same thing. Look at the Russia collusion hoax. Look at the lies they spread about COVID-19. This is easily done because there are only a handful of big media companies that are all connected at the very top. So they coordinate these disinformation campaigns. They try to get people to believe what they want us to believe so that they can sell a product or push a certain political narrative. If you don't understand that by now, then there's nothing I can do for you. Anyway, all of Nibiru's symptoms are given cover stories in the mainstream news. And what are some of these cover stories that we've heard? Well, global warming, it's man-made, right? They try to blame us for global warming so they can raise our taxes. The earth wobble, you saw that slide, they blame it on droughts, earthquakes, fossil fuel, ice sheets, global warming. They blame everything on global warming and then they blame global warming on us, right? The uptake in earthquakes, they say it's fracking or it's caused by global warming. The animal die-offs, they'll claim that it's a bacteria or that it's global warming. The second sun sightings, they'll call it a trick of the light, they'll call it Saharan dust, and they'll blame it on global warming. And that tends to be the catch-all scapegoat for a lot of this stuff. Another cover-up example. So back in 2018, there was a huge rash of volcanic explosions, most of them not really covered in the news in the United States, but unprecedented in their size and number and scope for such a short period of time. So what did they do? They put out this article. Scientists say rash of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions on Ring of Fire not connected. Oh, okay. The average Joe sees that headline and it says, oh, nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. Go back to sleep. Another example of the ridiculous nature of mainstream media cover-ups from Newsweek. The weird way that climate change could make earthquakes worse. Oh, so all the big earthquakes we're having are caused by climate change, which is caused by humans driving their SUVs. So again, it's all our fault. Humans are causing earthquakes now. See, that's the logic here. And they put these articles out as soon as the worry or concern pops up in people's minds, they try to put everyone back to sleep with fake news articles like this. And here's another one of my favorite cover-up articles from 2018. The long read, why Silicon Valley billionaires are prepping for the apocalypse in New Zealand. See, they're going to try to explain away why so many billionaires who are in the know about Nibiru and the pole shift are prepping for the pole shift. And here are the excuses it gives. Well, they like New Zealand because of libertarianism. It's a libertarian kind of place. Or they have a J.R.R. Tolkien obsession, and they want to go see where Peter Jackson filmed all those Lord of the Rings movies. That's why they're buying bunkers in New Zealand. It's kind of ridiculous. Even though at the same time they admit that many of them are buying farms and sheep stations pretty far inland up in the hills, away from the waves, away from the coast, away from the flooding. As long as I'm educating you about cover-up examples, let's talk about one of their techniques. It's called false prophecy. This is where they trot out some self-proclaimed expert on a phenomenon who makes a hard date prediction of when something will happen. And then they publicize this in the media and they splash it across social media and the magazines and the news and the headlines. And then when that date passes and nothing happens, they discredit the whole movement. And they've done this with the pole shift and with Nibiru, and they've used some high-profile people. And there was one time they did this in 2017. They had an author claim that the planet named Nibiru would collide with planet Earth. A lie, it doesn't collide with planet Earth. All based on a few vague passages from the Bible. And of course, when it didn't happen, the date came and left. All the people who paid attention to that hoax now believe that whenever they hear the word Nibiru, that it's all nonsense. And then they won't take seriously any actual true warnings that they hear. So you see how that works? Very tricky, but they do this all the time. Here's fake news Newsweek again with an article from January 28 trying to confuse people about the term pole shift, using the words pole shift. They want to confuse people in their minds so that they don't, if they ever hear actual factual data about Nibiru or the upcoming pole shift, they'll dismiss it or they'll get confused about it or they'll run down the wrong rabbit hole. It says Earth's magnetic poles show signs they're about to flip, exposing humans to radiation and blackouts. Now that's nonsense, of course. For the Earth's poles to flip, that means the sun's magnetic field would need to flip. And if that did happen, all the planets would kind of rotate 180 degrees and life would go on as normal. We really wouldn't change anything. So now, but after seeing this article, people, they hear the name Nibiru and they go, wasn't that the hoax from a few years ago? And now when they hear the term pole shift, they'll think, is that magnetic pole flipping thing I read about? So it's also confusing that they don't know what to believe and end up dismissing it all, which is exactly what they want. So they've covered the two main terms. Now Nibiru, the term Nibiru has been smeared in the public's mind with a hoax prophecy, and the term pole shift has been confused in the public's mind with this pole flip thing. Even friends I talk to now who know nothing about science or the pole shift or Nibiru, when I say pole shift, they go, oh, is that pole flip thingy where the Earth is supposed to flip upside down? See, it got to them. The headline got in there. Just for a quick reference, because I live in Southern California and this area is near and dear to me and my family, here is a 600-foot flood map of North County, San Diego. So after the pole shift, check it out, not doing so well, underwater basically. But even before that flooding, the waves, the sloshing, remember the sloshing that happens during the shift itself, that's going to wipe out all coastal communities on in California and Washington and Oregon, basically anywhere along the coast. So go ahead and make your real estate decisions accordingly. And that is the end of Science of the Pole Shift. If you made it all the way here, thank you. You're very patient. And this is the first long video like this I've done, and I'm not very good at it. I have a ton of respect for YouTubers, professional and amateur, who put out slick, well-made presentations online. It takes a lot of work. And I'll finish with this. There is a lot I did not cover in this presentation. I didn't even mention Zeta Talk. I didn't talk about the Anunnaki or the rotation stoppage of the Earth or EMP effects or the Schumann resonance. So there's so much. It's such a huge, broad topic for discussion. The point of this presentation and the goal was really to take the untrained newbie to the topic and present them with as much well-ordered evidence as possible to let them draw the conclusion that Nibiru and the pole shift are real. Now, I understand that it takes more than just an intellectual understanding to accept the reality of Nibiru and the pole shift. It takes a certain level of spiritual maturity. You can have somebody who's a IQ of 160, PhD geologist and astronomer, and they'll watch this whole presentation and they'll just deny the whole thing, because denial is a basic fundamental dynamic of human psychology. When your psyche is presented with data and facts that it can't accept, it'll just deny it. It'll come up with some excuse. So I understand that seeing all this data in itself is not enough, but hopefully the right audience will be drawn to this presentation, and it will help cement in their minds the reality of what's coming and then help them take action. And I don't really talk about actions that can be taken. That's kind of the next step. That comes after accepting the reality. So I hope to have another presentation out discussing actions that can be taken for survival. All right. Thank you. Goodbye.